All right. Hi, everyone. Today we have two special guests with us, Stuart Crickmer and Rob Jung. I'm really excited that they have been able to find the time to talk to the Psychology of Money class at Northern Kentucky University. They came to me, or I learned from them who they were through the Edwards Initiative. And so most of you watching probably don't know anything about that. So first of all, I'll let Stuart and Rob introduce themselves and then talk about their connection to the Edwards Initiative. And I'll start with you, Stuart. Welcome to both of you.
All right, thanks, Cecile. And hi, guys. And my name is Stuart Crickmer, and I basically play games for a living. So for years, in fact, Rob and I used to work together years ago as investment managers. Rob still does, as he'll tell you. For the last 20 plus years, I've used games as a way of educating people about investing in finance and things like that, and simulations and so forth. And it's something that Cecile's going to let you guys experience some of the work we've done. But I guess I would say I've been more in the realm of kind of theory and play, and Rob is still in the real world. And I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. I appreciate it. Cecile, thank you for those nice words. As it relates to the Edwards Initiative, we are a private foundation, or it's a public foundation, and we created it for the whole idea of helping educate people in the area of money and investing and helping them get to the next level. It's an area which is sorely needed, a lot of attention, and nobody's out there doing it. So in my day job, my dog in the background, in my day job, I manage people's portfolios. And one of my clients left a lot of money to a private foundation that we use to create the public foundation to help educate people at all levels, whether they be students, whether they be adults. And it's really just helping them by introducing the concepts of investing and then taking it a little bit further. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, so I'll start with you, Rob, since you work in the real world with people and their portfolios. Based on your experience, how do you think people feel about money generally?
Generally, it's a topic they really don't want to discuss. It's a taboo. It's like politics, money, and a few other things at Thanksgiving at the dinner table. It's taboo. You don't talk about it for the most part. My own personal life, I didn't really know what my parents had until very late in life. And it's sad because I think my dad could have really appreciated, mother and father, I should say, really could have appreciated what my brother and I had to offer them. But it was, very taboo, hands off. And it's an area where we should have more open dialogue.
I think my students would completely agree that, they feel like they don't know anything about the topic. And I guess another question that sort of emerges is we know from many news stories that people have a lot of trouble planning for retirement. They don't save enough money for retirement. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people have such a hard time planning for retirement?
Great question. And probably the biggest issue is people can't see themselves 20, 30, 40, 50 years out in the future. They have a hard enough time planning the weekend. And they'll spend more time planning this year's vacation than planning for retirement. Okay, vacation's a week long. Retirement, depending on how lucky you are, could be anywhere from 25 to maybe 15 years, somewhere around there. So it's more important to plan for retirement, but people just don't give it focus. And I think it's mainly due to they can't put the concept or that picture in their head.
Yeah,
I would maybe add to that. I totally agree with that. And I think it's true not just for investing in financial stuff. It's true for everything. It's like other things that people do that they'll, pay a price for down the road if they, don't take care of themselves, that kind of thing. And there's this sense that it's complicated and intimidating, and people don't want to look at that. And I think one of the messages we like to get across is this stuff isn't all that difficult. In fact, people ask us, why are we working with the psychology department, as opposed to the business department? And the simple answer is investing in financial things aren't that difficult. the basics of them are pretty simple. The hard part is all the human nature stuff. It's that, why would you do something now where you're not going to see the results of it until years down the road? And that's the key, and that's why we're here.
So
Go ahead. I'm
sorry.
I was going to say, it's the soft science, like you were saying. We all know we shouldn't smoke, but we do it. We look at that short-term gratification we receive, and we don't weigh that against that long-term cost that is coming out, that's going to come back and catch us someday down the road. So I'm sorry, interrupted.
No, great follow-up then is this class is in the psychology department. And so one of the things that psychologists often talk about is emotions. So maybe I'll ask Stuart this question. How much do you think that the emotions that people have change their decisions about investing, and what role does that psychology piece play in helping people or hurting people when they're managing their finances and planning for retirement?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest factor. Again, like I said, the mechanics of investing aren't that hard. However, it doesn't mean people in the investment business don't want you to think it's hard. And things are changing, like we talked about before we got started here. Rob and I have been interested in this field, I guess, of, they call it behavioral finance or psychology and money, for at least 20 years. And back when we first started looking into this stuff, people said, well, you can't bring in psychology thinking, things like that. But I think it's critically important, and fortunately, the industry is starting to see that. So you will now see large investment companies that are talking about, how people make decisions and so forth. And as we've talked about before, I think the field of psychology and money is not just something interesting to look at for your own personal benefit, but I think there are going to be career opportunities there that haven't existed for a while. So I think if anybody's interested in this whole area of money and finance, there's been a lot of work done, especially since the early 60s and so forth. But Rob and I talk a lot about, there's been a lot of work to identify the problem, but now's the opportunity to start looking at the solutions. And I think that's kind of exciting from the standpoint of somebody in the psychology field. So most of the, I don't want to say bad decisions, but most of the problems that are caused when it comes to finance and money, I think can be tied back in some way to emotional responses and decision making.
Rob, do you want to add anything about
Sure.
that? Since you work with people day to day and
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. And it truly is that. Stuart, I think it's the number one issue. In dealing with clients like I do day to day. As you all recall, we went through kind of a roller coaster ride here over the last 6 months. The market dropped about 34% in a very short period of time, about a month time period. And it came roaring back in the next 4 or 5 months. And I was talking to clients who were telling me in late March, I want out. I can't stand it anymore. Get me out. That's an emotional response. And even though that I could convey to them that we've never had a market that we've not recovered from. We've recovered from every bad market we've recovered from. We've always recovered 100% of the time. It may take a little bit of time, but we recovered. And even though I talked to them about that emotion, that pain they were feeling, they couldn't get over. And now I'm talking to them on the other end where we did feather the portfolio back, and they're saying, well, get me in faster. I want in now. Well, you're doing the opposite of what you should be doing. We should be buying low and selling high, and we're doing the exact opposite. So it is emotion, 100%.
Yeah, Rob, what you just said, Rob, you've mentioned to me studies where if you look at how the overall market did, just average stock market relative to people making decisions, people on their own tend to do exactly the opposite of what they should do. So and we saw this back in 2008, we saw it this year, when the market starts to go down and you start seeing these scary stories and so forth, people get stressed out about it, but they kind of hold on and can't decide what to do. And it's only when they get to a point they can't take it anymore, that they just said, well, let's get out. And then as the market goes up, they don't feel like it's safe to get back in yet. So they'll wait until it's gone back up, and then they will get back in. And that is extremely costly. But one of the things that we try to get people to understand is everything that people talk about that you see on the internet or TV or hear about, everybody's talking about what's happening in the short term. But if you're, especially if you're a younger person, you're starting your career and you're investing for your retirement, it's years down the road. What happens in the short term is almost entirely irrelevant. So one of the skills you need is to learn to tune out the overload of information, which not only is it highly inaccurate, it simply isn't relevant.
Stuart,
That's hard to do though, isn't it? Because, you know, you turn on the TV and a couple of months ago, the market was dramatically dropping and people were panicking, you know, so.
It's the words they're using, the words when they describe what's going on. The market's getting hammered. They're exaggerating. These are nothing more than click points or points to get you to watch that story. That's all this is. It's just getting involved. Benjamin Graham, the guy who's considered to be the father of investing, had a quote a long time ago, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he talks about the market in the short term being a voting machine, a popularity contest is really what it boils down to. And then over the long term, a weighing machine where it's based on substance. And what you have in the short term is just a voting popularity contest. Who's in, who's out for the day, for the moment. I pulled up some headlines from Market Watch, one of the popular websites that are out there. In less than a 24-hour period, they talk about new bull market is staged, could see the next 3 years being up 30%. 24 hours later, another strategist comes out and says, what could trigger the next market pullback? And you know, how could you make a decision on any of those headlines? You would be buying and selling back and forth. You'd be a ping pong ball.
Yeah, that's an interesting exercise, actually, is if you have people go through just for a couple of weeks and daily capture some headlines, you'll very quickly get a sense of how off the wall these things are. But as you alluded to, Rob, the purpose of a headline is not to really communicate information that's going to help you make decisions. It's to get you to read an article or whatever it happens to be. But I guess to me, this is what likes to see when you say, well, how do you get people to do that? To me, that's the big challenge that, well, I say we have. This is in terms of educating people. That's the big challenge. How do you get people to learn a skill set, where the skill set is to learn to look at something that you're seeing information and just kind of step back and process it and be a little more skeptical and critical and not react to it. And one of the first things, an analogy we'll use is, because I talk about how poor financial people are at making predictions. And partly because they'll make just these extreme, you know, the market's going to do this, whatever. If you look at what a good prediction is, it's got three things. It's got a time frame, it's got a range of outcomes, and it has a confidence level. So if you look at who does that well, it's like the weather forecast. So we've got some, I guess last Friday, our son and our daughter-in-law, his parents were going to come over and sit outside, socially distancing, all these good things. But we checked the weather forecast and saw it was like 70-80% chance of rain, so we just rescheduled it. The weather forecast for the next day would have been completely irrelevant because we weren't planning on doing anything that day, so we weren't looking at it. So part of the thing is to learn when stuff matters and when it doesn't. And this kind of comes back to the idea of when you don't have experience in an area, sometimes it's hard to know if something's relevant or not. And in a lot of cases, the vast majority of the things people see when it comes to investing in particular isn't relevant. So everybody that we're talking to in your class, what happens in the stock market in 2020, 2021 is almost completely irrelevant. You know, what happens in 2050, 2060, that's far more important, but nobody's thinking about that yet.
So to dovetail on that statement, a lot of college students, you know, the idea of retirement investing doesn't feel relevant to them. It seems so far away. Like their current world experience is student loan debt, not having enough money, you know, associating money with stress and worry about, you know, how am I going to pay back my student loans? So how do you make something that is decades away relevant to somebody when it seems so far off from what it's on their radar screen?
Well, I do have an idea on that, and I think it has to do with giving people more immediate feedback on whether they're doing stuff that is smart. Now,
Mhm.
you can do that, but it's flipping things around and doing things completely differently than the way the industry tends to do it. In other words, you can look at somebody and say the decisions you're making on now have you on track to be in, you know, great shape. But even to simplify it from there, one thing that we look at is why do you invest in the first place? And we kind of talk about the goal. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people talk about investing to get rich, make money, all those kind of things. We tend to look at it a little bit differently, where the primary goal when it comes to money is make basically money irrelevant. In other words, if you're in a position where you're not worried about money, then you can go enjoy your life and, you know, do those kind of things. So there's some simple things you can do that will help you now, and some simple things you can do that will help you down the road. And there was an interesting exercise we did once with a group of people where it was a group of group of our NFL players we were working with, and they're like wives or significant others. And we asked, if in a word, how would you define success? And if you stop and think about that for a minute, a lot of people will come up with a lot of different answers. Even students, you know, it might be um, you know, academic achievement, it might be, you know, some sports achievement, it might be fame, it might be money, it might be all kinds of things. But if you simplify it, what we tend to think of as the single word would be happiness. And it's actually kind of hard to argue against that. And it's like, what can you do so that you are enjoying your life now, but also can enjoy it in the future? And that's also interesting because you'll see a lot of times that people talk about managing money and so forth, telling you all the stuff you shouldn't do. Like you shouldn't be going to Starbucks, or you shouldn't be, you know, the famous one a couple of years ago was the avocado toast and so forth. And I would listen to those things and I would think, okay, here we have people who have never known, first of all, what it's like to not have money, telling people not to go, you know, spend money. But if what you're doing now in the present, in the moment, allows you to enjoy that, you know, without going totally crazy, and then you can also be doing some stuff that will make sure you're on track in the future. That's a way to do it. So, like with some of the stuff that Rob and I work on, it's possible today to say, what you're doing right now, you're already successful when it comes to your future finances. You may not realize it. And one of the reasons there is the other big factor that people cannot possibly get their head around, and Rob mentioned it already earlier, is compounding. And that's why investing is one of those things where virtually, I mean, almost everybody we talk to who's in their 50s, 60s or older, and we talk about the stuff, they say, why didn't anybody tell us about this compounding thing when we were younger? Because it's not linear. And so we'll tend to talk about it. I don't even like the word compounding so much, but investing is like your money going viral. You know, so if you understand how social media can go viral, now we've seen how a virus can go viral. It's not a linear thing; it just blows up. It's crazy. And so Rob and I were doing some calculations recently where we were looking at some of the work he did and how such like little amounts of money can grow into insanely big amounts of money, you know, down the road, to the point that it doesn't really require that you sacrifice a lot now. You just have to be aware of it, do it and understand it, and let it work for you.
So, Rob, is that true that people have a hard time wrapping their head around compounding and how that plays an important role?
Oh yes, it is so true. And the way we try to get around that is through what I'll call experiential education. And when you take somebody through the equation and you let them feel it through the game that we play, then they start to understand it. And the game, it's only a 10-year period, but when they see $500 over a 10-year period grow to $2,000, $3,000, okay, now it really is starting to become somewhat concrete. Lectures are good. It helps set a foundation. Reading helps support that foundation, I guess, a little bit stronger. But actually feeling it, doing it, playing it, that makes a big difference. That solidifies that in your head. I really believe that.
Okay, so that leads to my next question about why do you think it's important that people play games, do simulations to try and understand, these concepts? And is that where portfolios came from?
It is, but the simple answer is experience. Most people learn best through experience. Unfortunately, experience in real time takes too long. So if we can simulate experience and let people, especially with these compounding type of things, let them get years worth of experience, make decisions on your own, make mistakes, whatever, and then go back and do it in the real world, that's one of the most effective ways to do it. Now, I mean, people have used the term gamification, which is not something we never actually really use, but sometimes we do stuff that is a game, but sometimes it's just purely a simulation, but it's a way to get experience-based knowledge without risking, real money. And Rob, you alluded to you can read things, you can listen to things, you can watch things, and so forth. But it's only when you get to do it yourself and kind of feel it that it sinks in. And there's, I suppose, a reason why pilots train on flight simulators before they go take out a real plane.
Spot on, Stuart. I couldn't agree with you more. I fancy myself somewhat of a weekend carpenter, and I can read and I can watch a lot of videos on what I'm trying to accomplish, but until I get in there and do it, it's not the same thing. And that's the great thing about playing the game, is in a relatively short period, 2 hours roughly speaking, we're going to give you the sense and experience of investing for 10 years. And we're going to let you make some of those decisions. Some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be lucky, some are going to be unlucky, and some of them are going to be bad decisions. And you're going to learn something. It's hands-on experience, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Well, I just learned something. What are you doing next weekend? Because I've got.
So
go ahead.
So tell me, when people try these games or simulations for the first time, are there sort of repeated mistakes that they make that you're trying to correct, so they don't do it in real life?
Yeah, obviously there are. I was surprised. Now, Rob's talking, we have a variety of different games that we do, and Rob's referring to a physical game that we play with dice and so forth. That's a 10-year simulation. And yeah, I'll watch people doing that, and we're rolling dice, and we're simulating if certain stocks go up or down or whatever. And we'll see people making decisions based on what happened on the last few die rolls. So if a stock in the game has been going down, now it depends on the group. A lot of people will want to sell that stock, get out of it, and so forth, because they just assume it's going to continue to go down. Even more so than the real world, it's absolutely clear that we're rolling dice, and this is completely random. And not only that, they know that based on the way the dice are configured, they go up more often than they go down. Yet they will react to things, and I find it fascinating because it should be. I mean, I'm thinking, well, it should be obvious, but it's not. So you see human behavior and reactions in a game setting, and you're right, Cecile. Sometimes we can let them experience that, and then kind of ask, well, why were you doing that, and then kind of point out. And then people normally will at some point come out and realize, okay, well, that didn't make any sense what I'm doing. But I guess that comes back a little bit to your question, Cecile, about how do we not do that? And that's why I think this stuff is so important. And again, to me, this is the evolution of this psychology of money. what tools can there be to help people uh, kind of keep themselves from making, bad choices? Because even if you know it's going to happen, we're all susceptible to doing these things. So to me, I don't know what all the answers are yet, but there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
So the three of us, you know, we sat around and talked about the need for this class. So this is the first time I've ever taught a psychology of money class, but historically, at most universities, money is often in classes in the business school, and that's about it. So do you think that there's sort of a need to have classes about money in other places? What's the education need, do you think, at universities, but also in schools and all, in the general public?
It's off the charts. The need is out there, and it's across the whole spectrum of the population. And I think the sooner you do this, the better. And the sooner you get people realizing that making decisions around money involves emotion as well as some math, and you can help them get through some of the emotional hurdles, obstacles that are in the way, the better it's going to be, and the better, smarter decisions that will be the outcome when they understand that there are biases exist. I mean, an example, most people will put heavier weight to something that most recently happened to them, and not just with money, with everything, than they do deeper, longer put away things that have happened to them. And so there's a bias that exists there. So it's sorely needed, and I think you could start this. Quite honestly, I think you probably start it, and Stuart, you back me up on this. I think you could start this in fourth grade, and then I think you should reinforce the same basic principles all the way through college and even into adulthood.
Yeah, it's probably, I mean, we have programs that we start at the seventh, I mean, we have done stuff down at the fourth grade, but we routinely do one that starts at seventh grade, and we actually use the game as a way to get seventh grade kids excited about math. And now our focus there is more on math. But you're right, is the more you kind of get the message, the better. Unfortunately, when you get to the high school level, a lot of high schools, a lot of the students we'll work with, depends on the high school, don't have any type of financial education whatsoever, because they're focused more on quote unquote the higher end. You're more likely to take a calculus class, than something about what we're talking about. Even though the vast majority of people won't really use calculus when they get out of school, but everybody needs to know this stuff. I think every student at NKU probably should take your class, Cecile, because it's, I think this is one of these things that transcends your career choice, that it's something that you're going to have to deal with regardless. And also that, it's, I keep coming back to this, the investment part is just insanely easy on the mechanical side. It's, if you can get a handle on understanding when you don't have to stress out about something, or if you can just get that part down, then that frees you up to really enjoy the time you're sitting here in college in the middle of a pandemic, or when you start your career, things will be better down the road, and not everything's going to go right. I mean, you're inevitably going to run into challenges and so forth. But what we're really talking about in terms of decision making goes well beyond, like, everything you're teaching them is not just about money. It's about virtually every choice that you have to make.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And I think if you're a better decision maker about money, you're probably going to be a better decision maker about a lot of things. And that's probably a really good thing for your, having a great life, right? So.
But it can go the other way too, because we've seen the other extreme. The guy who, or lady, or who sacrifices literally everything their entire life, never enjoys life, works multiple jobs, and waiting for that day that they can enjoy everything. And then it seems like inevitably they get to that day, and then physically they're not able to, or whatever happens to be. So I'm not a big fan of people who tell you you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't spend money to enjoy your time now. In fact, to me, that seems like the whole kind of point of it, as long as you can do that responsibly, but still do things. I also, and this is, I don't know, Rob, if you've run into this. I remember when I was younger, first starting out working, being impressed by people who had either money or credentials or all this kind of stuff. And like I've completely come full circle now. So that I'm not impressed by people just because of a title or how much money they make or what car they have and all that kind of stuff. I'm far more impressed with people who are interesting people, high integrity people, people I enjoy talking with and so forth. And, I guess that's part of it too. It's not just doing stuff for yourself, but that there's that whole psychological aspect of why you're trying to do stuff. And, do you need the big fancy car and all that? Why are you doing it? And there's been a lot of work done in that area as well.
Stuart, I think you're spot on. At the end of the day, money is a tool that you utilize to do other things. And happiness is really what you want. You want to be an interesting person. And we've talked about this all the time, how you want to balance your spending with your investing. Sadly, I've had clients that have invested everything, their whole life, sacrificed, given up, and they get to an age then where their bodies can't do the things that they want to do. And it's sad to see that happen. And then it's going over to a child or somebody else. They're getting the rewards, but you really need a little bit of a balance in life.
Yeah, Rob, you were the first investment person I think I ever heard of talk about when you had a client who they had done so well that essentially they had all the money they needed. Tried to talk to them about not continuing to try to get that number higher, but actually, why don't you do something and enjoy your life now? And actually having difficulty convincing people to do that.
You're correct. And this was individuals that are born during that Depression era. They were born in the 20s to 30s. And I remember my grandmother saving plastic bags and things like that for leftovers. And why? There's no reason to do that. But, they were so used to sacrificing and saving that when it came time to consume, it just became difficult to do that. And now here we are trying to teach the opposite of that for the younger generation. But it is a balance. You need to do some saving. You need to enjoy life as well.
That's great. I think that's probably a great place to stop. Thank you both. I really appreciate your time and your insights. And hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking us to do this. I mean, Rob and I talk about this stuff all the time, and anytime you want to get us on one of these, we'll be glad to discuss it. Or if students have any questions specifically they want us to address, we don't know all the answers, but we'll have no problem coming up with something to say.
Same here. Anything I can do, you let me know. I'd love to stay engaged with this because this is very important to Stuart and I, and we really want to take this to the next level.
Great. Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Azir.